Empire of Pain: The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty by Patrick Radden Keefe. Imagine a crisp spring morning in 2019, high above the streets of Midtown Manhattan. Inside a gleaming black tower, past the hushed, carpeted corridors of one of New York's most powerful law firms, sits a woman who'd rather be anywhere else. Her name is Kath Sackler. She's a doctor, a billionaire, and right now she's surrounded by more than 40 lawyers whose sole job is to protect her. Across the table sits Paul Hanley, and he's got one mission: to trace America's deadliest drug epidemic back to its source. By this moment in 2019, hundreds of thousands of Americans had died from opioid overdoses. The crisis seemed to explode out of nowhere, touching every corner of the country. But Hanley believed it all started with one drug, made by one company, owned by one family: the Sacklers. Now, if you'd heard that name before 2019, you probably knew it from museum walls: the Sackler Wing at the Met, the Sackler Galleries at the Louvre. Their name gleamed in brass at Harvard, at Oxford, at the Smithsonian. They were America's modern royalty, celebrated for their generosity and refinement. The name Sackler meant culture, sophistication, and philanthropy at its finest. But there was another side to that story, one hidden behind closed doors and sealed documents. The Sacklers owned a private pharmaceutical company called Purdue Pharma. In 1996, they launched a revolutionary painkiller called OxyContin. Over the next 2 decades, it would generate more than $35 billion and transform the Sacklers into one of the wealthiest families on Earth. It would also become ground zero for the deadliest drug crisis in American history. Patrick Radden Keefe's masterwork, Empire of Pain, unravels this hidden history. It's a sweeping family saga that reads like a thriller, tracking 3 generations from immigrant poverty to unimaginable wealth and power. The book became a sensation, winning major awards not just for its investigative brilliance, but because it tells a story that's deeply, tragically human. Today, we're diving into that story together. We'll follow the Sackler family from a modest Brooklyn grocery store to the pinnacle of global influence. And here's what I promise: by the end, you'll understand not just how this crisis began, but something more profound about the difference between reputation and character, and how one family's obsession with their name became their ultimate undoing. This is a story that will stay with you. Our journey begins not in a corporate tower, but in a cramped Brooklyn grocery store in the early 1900s. Meet Isaac and Sophie Sackler, Jewish immigrants who arrived in America with nothing but dreams and determination. Isaac came from a long line of rabbis, and he carried with him a deep sense of pride. He ran a small shop called Sackler Bros, and he had 3 sons: Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond. Isaac told his boys that he couldn't give them money or connections, but he could give them something more valuable: a good name, he would say. That was their inheritance. The eldest, Arthur Sackler, was a force of nature from the start. Born in 1913, Arthur possessed an almost superhuman energy and ambition. During the Great Depression, while still a teenager, he juggled a dozen side hustles, selling anything and everything. But he wasn't just working for himself. He was supporting his parents and paying for his younger brothers' education. Their mother Sophie had one dream: all her boys would become doctors. To her, medicine meant respectability, security, and a chance to serve humanity. All 3 brothers did become doctors, but Arthur discovered something unexpected along the way. While in medical school, he took a part-time gig writing copy for a pharmaceutical company. And he realized he had a rare gift. He was brilliant at selling things, especially drugs. This was the 1940s and 50s, the dawn of the miracle drug era. Penicillin was saving lives, but the way pharmaceutical companies marketed prescription medicines was stale and uninspired. Arthur saw an opportunity that would change everything. He took over a small medical advertising firm called William Douglas McAdams and revolutionized the industry. Arthur understood something other people missed. Doctors weren't just scientists making purely rational decisions. They were human beings, influenced by authority, prestige, and subtle persuasion. Arthur created campaigns that looked like serious medical education, but were actually sophisticated advertising. He pioneered celebrity doctor endorsements in medical journals. He funded studies that, surprise, showed his clients drugs in the best light. He built an army of charming sales representatives who would visit doctors' offices, schmooze over lunch, and leave behind glossy materials. His breakthrough came with a new class of drugs, tranquilizers. You've probably heard of Valium and Librium. Working for the pharmaceutical giant Roche, Arthur's agency marketed these pills not for serious mental illness, but for everyday stress and anxiety. The ads targeted women especially, the overwhelmed housewife, the nervous student. They promised relief from the tensions of modern life. The campaigns worked spectacularly. Valium became America's most prescribed drug, the first medication in history to hit $100 million in sales. Arthur became wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. But he learned something crucial. The real money wasn't in treating the sickest patients. It was in convincing relatively healthy people that they needed a pill for life's ordinary problems. There were warning signs. People were getting hooked on Valium. They suffered terrible withdrawal symptoms. But Arthur and his clients had a ready-made excuse that would echo through the decades. It wasn't the drug's fault. Some people just had addictive personalities. While building his empire, Arthur never forgot his brothers. In 1952, he bought them a small, struggling company that made unglamorous products like earwax remover and a laxative. The company had a solid, respectable name, Purdue Pharma. Arthur stayed in the background, but he'd given his brothers their own vehicle for success. For decades, Mortimer and Raymond ran it as a modest, profitable business. The story takes its fateful turn in the late 1980s. Purdue had developed a morphine pill called OxyContin with a special time-release coating. It helped cancer patients manage severe pain, and it was a good product. But there was a problem. The patent was about to expire. Generic competitors would flood in, and profits would disappear. The family needed a new blockbuster. Enter the second generation, particularly Raymond's son, Richard Sackler. Where Arthur had been charming and charismatic, Richard was awkward and intense. He'd been groomed to take over the family business, and he was obsessed with finding OxyContin's replacement. They decided to apply their time-release technology to a different opioid, oxycodone. Now, oxycodone was a powerful narcotic, chemically similar to heroin, but it had a marketing advantage. The word morphine scared people. It made them think of death and cancer. But oxycodone? Most doctors only knew it from mild combination pills like Percocet. They thought it was weaker than morphine. Here's the thing. Oxycodone is actually about twice as potent as morphine. Internal documents later revealed that Purdue knew about this widespread misunderstanding among doctors, and they made a calculated decision. They wouldn't correct it. They would exploit it. They named their new pill OxyContin and marketed it as a gentle, safe option for all kinds of common pain, back pain, arthritis, fibromyalgia. The pill, to start with and to stay with. But they faced one major obstacle, most doctors were reluctant to prescribe strong opioids long-term because of addiction fears. This hesitation had a name: opiophobia. So the Sacklers launched one of the most aggressive and misleading marketing campaigns in pharmaceutical history. It was Arthur's playbook, amplified to a dangerous extreme. Richard Sackler himself kicked things off at a lavish 1996 launch party for the sales team. He promised them that OxyContin would unleash a blizzard of prescriptions that will bury the competition. Purdue more than doubled its sales force. They trained these reps to downplay addiction risks with a central talking point based on a single sentence the FDA had approved for the label. Delayed absorption, as provided by OxyContin tablets, is believed to reduce the abuse liability of the drug. From that one unproven belief, Purdue spun a myth. They told doctors the addiction risk was less than 1%. This claim was based on a flimsy 5-sentence letter in a medical journal that had nothing to do with long-term opioid use. But it sounded scientific, and the sales reps repeated it like gospel. They targeted general practitioners, doctors with little addiction training, and used data mining to identify the highest volume prescribers in each territory. They called these doctors whales and focused their efforts there. Purdue created an entire ecosystem of influence. They funded patient advocacy groups that promoted opioid use. They paid thousands of doctors to give presentations echoing their marketing messages. They sponsored luxurious pain management seminars in resort destinations. They distributed coupons for free 30-day supplies, getting tens of thousands of patients started on the drug. The message was always the same: pain was undertreated, and OxyContin was safe, effective, and virtually non-addictive. It worked beyond their wildest dreams. First-year sales, $44 million. 4 years later, $1 billion. The Sacklers had their blockbuster. But almost immediately, something went terribly wrong. In rural areas, Appalachia, Maine, the Rust Belt, a new drug culture emerged. People discovered that crushing an OxyContin pill bypassed the time-release mechanism, delivering a massive, heroin-like rush. The pills, nicknamed hillbilly heroin, spread through black markets. Pharmacy robberies spiked, and people started dying. The company knew. Their own sales reps filed reports about pills being crushed and snorted, about doctors who now saw OxyContin as the street drug all the drug addicts are seeking. But instead of pulling back, Purdue doubled down. Richard Sackler's response was aggressive denial. The drug wasn't the problem. The people abusing it were. He ordered his team to, quote, hammer on the abusers in every way possible. He called them, quote, reckless criminals. This became the company's central defense, a sharp division between legitimate pain patients who never got addicted and reckless abusers who were responsible for their own fate. Any evidence blurring this line, the countless patients who took the drug exactly as prescribed and became hopelessly dependent, was ignored or denied. The company knew another dangerous secret. Their claim of 12-hour pain relief wasn't true for many patients. Internal studies showed the drug often wore off after 8 hours, leaving patients in withdrawal before their next dose. This cycle of relief and suffering is a classic addiction trap. When doctors started prescribing 8-hour schedules, Purdue didn't object. More frequent doses meant more pills sold. In 2001, a U.S. attorney in Maine issued a public warning about OxyContin abuse. The story was breaking into national news. Purdue fought back with lawyers and PR firms. 3 company executives, Michael Friedman, Howard Udell, and Paul Goldenheim, became the public face, touring the country and testifying before Congress. Under oath, they lied. They claimed the company knew nothing about significant abuse before 2000, despite mountains of internal evidence proving otherwise. For a while it worked, but in Virginia, two federal prosecutors named Rick Mountcastle and Randy Ramsier opened a criminal investigation. For 4 years, they built their case, examining millions of pages of documents. They found overwhelming evidence that Purdue had deliberately misled doctors and regulators about OxyContin's dangers. They prepared to bring felony charges against the 3 executives. This was the moment of greatest danger for the Sacklers. If those executives faced serious prison time, they might flip and testify against the family members who directed their actions. The Sacklers deployed their ultimate weapon, their wealth and connections. They hired former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani and former U.S. Attorney Mary Jo White. These lawyers went over the Virginia prosecutors' heads, appealing directly to senior officials at the Justice Department. The deal was cut behind closed doors. The felony charges against the executives were dropped. Instead, they'd plead guilty to a single misdemeanor, misbranding. No one would go to jail. In 2007, Purdue Pharma pleaded guilty to a felony charge of criminally misbranding OxyContin and agreed to pay over $600 million in fines. It sounds like a lot, but for a company making over $1 billion yearly from OxyContin, it was just a cost of doing business. And in a brilliant legal maneuver, the entity that actually pleaded guilty was Purdue Frederick, the old original company. Purdue Pharma, the cash cow, emerged with a clean slate. Crucially, not a single Sackler family member was charged. Their names barely appeared in court documents or press coverage. The 3 executives had, as someone inside the company put it, taken the fall for the family. The Sacklers were safe. Far from being chastened, they saw it as a victory. They continued marketing OxyContin aggressively and paying themselves hundreds of millions annually. Between 2008 and 2017, they pulled over $10 billion out of the company, transferring much of it to offshore trusts and shell corporations. But the world was changing. The crisis they'd helped create was spiraling out of control, and a new reckoning was coming, one they couldn't control with lawyers or money. It started with an artist. Nan Goldin, a celebrated photographer, nearly died from an OxyContin overdose in 2017. Emerging from rehab, she was filled with righteous fury. She'd watched friends die during the AIDS epidemic and recognized the same deadly indifference from those in power. She knew the Sackler name from museums she loved. She decided to expose the connection between the family's blood money and the art world that laundered their reputation. She founded an activist group called PAIN, Prescription Addiction Intervention Now. They staged dramatic die-ins at museums with Sackler-funded wings. At the Guggenheim, they showered the rotunda with thousands of fake prescriptions. At the Met's Sackler wing, they unfurled banners in front of the Temple of Dendur, chanting, "Temple of Greed." Goldin's protests were performance art impossible to ignore. For the first time, the Sackler name itself became toxic. One by one, the world's most prestigious institutions, the Tate, the Guggenheim, the Louvre, and finally the Met, announced they'd no longer accept Sackler donations. The name Isaac Sackler had prized above all else became synonymous with shame. Meanwhile, a new wave of litigation was building. State attorneys general, like Massachusetts's Maura Healey, filed thousands of lawsuits against Purdue, and, crucially, against individual Sackler family members. Healey's 2019 lawsuit was a bombshell, filled with the family's own emails and documents, revealing their direct management of the company and their callous disregard for consequences. The empire was crumbling. Facing overwhelming lawsuits and a ruined reputation, the Sacklers did what they'd always done. They tried to buy their way out. They pushed Purdue Pharma into bankruptcy in September 2019, immediately freezing all lawsuits. Then they offered a settlement. They'd give up ownership of Purdue, turning it into a public trust, and contribute several $billion to help address the opioid crisis. But the offer came with one non-negotiable condition: the family members would receive full, permanent immunity from all current and future civil lawsuits related to OxyContin. They would never have to admit wrongdoing. For many victims and prosecutors, it was outrageous. The Sacklers had drained billions from the company, leaving a bankrupt shell, and now they wanted to use bankruptcy court to shield their personal fortunes and escape accountability forever. As Empire of Pain concludes, the final chapter is still being written in bankruptcy court, but the Sackler Dynasty's story is already a powerful modern tragedy. It's about a family that lost its way, a company that prioritized profits above all else, and a country that paid a terrible price. It reveals how easily our trusted institutions, from government regulators to cultural establishments, can be corrupted by money. At its heart, it's a meditation on the meaning of a name. For 3 generations, the Sacklers worked tirelessly to etch their name on museum walls, hoping to secure a legacy of greatness. But a legacy isn't what you buy, it's what you build, and the name they built will forever be associated not with generosity, but with an empire of pain. Stepping back from this incredible story, it's hard not to feel both sadness and anger. Patrick Radden Keefe has given us more than a corporate scandal. He's painted a portrait of moral catastrophe. What strikes me most is the central irony running through the entire book. A family so obsessed with their name, yet completely blind to their true legacy. Isaac Sackler, the immigrant grocer, told his sons that a good name was the most valuable thing he could give them. For a time, they seemed to believe it. Arthur Sackler, for all his ruthless ambition, was driven by a desire for recognition and a place in history. He plastered the family name on buildings to achieve immortality. But this story shows us that a name, like money, is just a tool. It can build or it can hide. For the Sacklers, it became a shield, a beautiful facade concealing the ugly source of their wealth. This book is a powerful lesson in accountability. The Sacklers operated for decades with a sense of impunity, believing their wealth, lawyers, and philanthropic halo made them untouchable. They deflected blame, silenced critics, and co-opted the institutions meant to hold them accountable. The story of Purdue's relationship with the FDA, of former government officials becoming paid consultants, is a chilling reminder of how easily power corrupts. But what makes this story so compelling, especially for young people, is that it's not just about a few evil people. It's about a system. It's about a culture that celebrates wealth without questioning its origins. For years, the world's elite institutions happily took Sackler money, lent their prestige to the family name, and looked the other way. They were, in their own way, complicit. This book forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the institutions we admire and the price of their silence. So what can we take away? First, learn to look behind the name on the building. Question where wealth and power come from. Be skeptical of those who wrap themselves in philanthropy while refusing to answer for their actions. True character isn't measured by donation size but by integrity when no one's watching. Second, understand the power of a single determined voice. For years, the Sacklers seemed invincible. But then, a handful of journalists, prosecutors, and activists like Nan Goldin refused to back down. They told the truth, even when difficult, and they changed the story. One person, armed with truth, can make a difference. Finally, think about the legacy you want to build. The Sacklers wanted to be remembered, like the Carnegies, or Rockefellers, titans who left their mark on the world. But their story is a cautionary tale. A legacy isn't just what you leave behind, it's how you live. It's about daily choices, upheld values, and your impact on people around you. That was a summary of Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe. We've covered the major beats of this incredible saga, but honestly, a summary can only be a map. The real journey happens when you travel the terrain yourself. The true power of this book lies in the details, the voices, the scenes, the mountain of evidence Keefe has brilliantly assembled. This summary is here to help you decide if this story needs deeper exploration. If any part of this family's rise and fall has captured your imagination or stirred something within you, I urge you to pick up a copy. Reading it is more than learning history. It's an experience that will change how you think about wealth, power, and the stories we tell ourselves. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please hit that like button and subscribe. It lets me know these deep dives are making an impact and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another transformative book. Let's keep learning and growing together.